We're on session number 80. And just a disclaimer, we're in high allergy season in Las Vegas. So if we have kind of a raspy voice, it's most likely because of allergies.
Yes.
In our last session, we had a couple of different things going on. First, things are kind of dicey at the London Lodge due to Mrs. Kinsgford and her project of wanting to switch from esoteric Buddhist philosophy to Hermetic philosophy. And the Mahatmas were actually in favor of that. They said, fine, if that would be more acceptable and easier for the Europeans and the Londoners to accept, we can go with that. It's just as valid. So they were in favor of her remaining as president because there was an election coming up, and most of the members wanted Sinnett to run and for him to become president. He was just kind of sitting back to see what everyone would say, and then the Mahatmas decided they were in favor of Mrs. Kinsgford being still president. So that was going on. We also had a few more questions that Sinnett came up with regarding Davidson. And we did get a little bit of information regarding nirvana and samadhi and how that related to the experience in Davidson. So that was a little bit interesting. And then the Mahatmas had also made a proposition. We will find out that at almost the same time, Mrs. Kinsgford was making a similar proposal that there be two different study groups. And the Mahatmas had already proposed it in their letter, and she, before that letter ever arrived, introduced the same concept. So that they were all on the same page as far as having two different study groups.
It's like a collective consciousness almost.
Yeah. So we are ready to continue with the saga of the London Lodge in session number 80, which will begin with letter number 121. We're getting close to the end here, guys. There are 140 letters, and we're on 121. This one was received in London on February 7th, 1884, and it came by mail, so it took about a month to get there. He also sent another letter at the same time, and this one is a private letter that he sent to Sinnett, kind of a summary of what the other letter is about, which can be read to the London Lodge members. Let's go ahead and start that letter, received in London, February 7th, 1884.
It starts by saying, "Private. My dear friend, the enclosure is to be transmitted to the London Lodge by you in your capacity of Vice President of the parent society, and therefore representative of the President Founder, not as a member of the branch at London."
So he had no official title in the London Lodge. He was just a member. But he was also, and we haven't discussed this before because it never came up in the letters, he was the vice president of the international organization. Even though he didn't have a whole lot of confidence in HPB or Alcott, still they wanted him to be the vice president, and so he was. Now, we need to discuss a little bit.
Well, who was the president at the time? Was it HPB?
No, Alcott for life.
He was the president.
He was president, and the Mahatmas referred to him often as president founder or founder president.
That's who they're referring to. Okay, Alcott.
We need to discuss a word that KH uses a few times, and that is psychic. He's not using it in the same way that we would think of it today. When we say psychic, they would have said medium or clairvoyant, most likely. But at that time, they were referring to the Greek word psyche. The psyche, and even today we would think of that more as the mind, but it originally in Greek was the word for soul, spirit, breath, or life. Now that sounds like another word we know.
Atma.
Exactly. So it was much closer to the word Atma, which is a very spiritual level, the highest we could experience as individuals. And it refers to the animating principle that occupies and directs the physical body. It also was personified as a winged butterfly. They assumed that it meant the soul escaping the body, probably at death. But we would interpret that differently. We would say that is our goal as human beings, is to raise our consciousness to the level of the soul and to be able to do that in our waking state. So just a little bit of background information on how he's using the word psychic in his letters.
Are we assuming that he's using the word psychic just like this to mean, but obviously KH taught us the constitution of man, basically. So he's basically using this word to describe the divine triad with the prana maya kosha, with the etheric, because the animating principle is prana, and it says breath or life. That would be prana.
But he's using it more as a process, the psychic development, psychic process, not as a noun, but more as a verb.
Okay. I like the fact that we're learning about how the Greeks looked at it. It's interesting how many different traditions or philosophies or spiritual circles understand that there's a metaphysical part of us, obviously, and they all kind of describe it in different ways and lump the sections together or separate them in different ways. I like ours the best, the constitution of man divided into the 7 different bodies. The Greeks are approaching the truth, I think, but we would clearly split the breath aspect or the prana aspect different from atma or spirit, different from soul or causal body, or I guess in the Koshic method it'd be the Vijnana Maya Kosha or Vijnana Maya. It's interesting how the Greeks are getting there, but they're lumping all that into psyche.
Right.
And other traditions kind of have your spirit body and your physical, well, there's 7. It's just, that's an interesting insight there.
And in the modern day age, after the age of enlightenment, they divide that completely. Scientists don't believe in any of that stuff. At the end of life, lights out, done, that's it. You get one chance, and whatever you make of it, fine. So we're kind of at a disadvantage for that. Many people today prefer to embrace the scientists for their information rather than any kind of spiritual message, because that's just too woo-woo. I think it puts them at a severe disadvantage, but what do I know?
Continuing along with the letter. The recent events in which you have played a part are not altogether pleasant and may be distressing to some, yet it is better than the previous paralytic calm that prevailed.
This is interesting. Remember, he talked in the previous letter about there must be discord in all things for any progress to be made. So the paralytic calm was just this kind of standoff with nothing happening.
A fever in the human body is nature's way of trying to get rid of the causes of disease. As things were, the London branch was simply vegetating, and the great possibilities of psychic evolution in Britain were at a complete standstill.
So that's where he's using psychic evolution as a process of raising consciousness.
We've referred to that process as spiritual growth, expansion of consciousness, walking the path even.
And that's what Theosophy is all about,
yes.
Every part of it.
Karma evidently required that the stalemate be broken by the agency of the one most responsible for it, C.C. Massey. And so it was he who brought Mrs. Kinsgford to her present position.
He was the one who got her elected as president. She first arrived back in London after living on the continent for some period of time, early in 1883. And it was at that time that she joined the London, it wasn't even called the London branch, but the Theosophical Society in London. And immediately, C.C. Massey was smitten with her and her ideas. And he says, oh, let's make her president. He was the president up until then, but he decided he wanted to resign. So she was elected president at his behest. He put her in that position, so he has karma that goes along with that.
She has not accomplished her object, but karma has its own goal. Henceforth, the London group, aroused, stimulated, and warned, has a clear field in which to exercise its activities.
And what he means by her object, personally, the more I see of this whole situation, I think her real objective was that when she came and saw this organization all set up and that it wasn't going particularly well, thought, well, I'm a leader, I can take this over and I can make this my own organization. She had the good looks to impress all of the men. She dressed seductively. She was brilliant. She was extremely intelligent. She had a medical degree as a doctor. And she had a philosophy that she thought was far superior to anything else in the world. So I think that was her real objective, but let's just continue here.
Your own karma, my friend, requires you to play a still more conspicuous part in European theosophical affairs than you have up to now. Alcott's forthcoming visit will result in important developments, and you are to have a role in making that happen.
Ooh, Alcott is coming to town. Yeah, when they saw what was going on, said, we've got to do something here. So that's number one, why they got involved in this election. Normally, they would never get involved in a branch's election. But they saw the stalemate, they saw the opportunity for growth that was not going to happen unless somehow they interfered with that. And so they're sending Alcott, and unmentioned here is the fact that HPB also, because of all this turmoil, was in serious health again. Remember, they had to fix her a year or so ago, and now she's in serious decline yet again because of all the emotional drama. So they told Alcott to take her with him, but to take her somewhere in Europe, possibly in France or up in the Alps even. Some quiet place where she could have 3 months of quiet and solitude and hopefully restore her energy and her health.
That's what I need.
Yeah.
I need to go do that.
You do. We all do.
Yes.
We don't get it, though.
My desire is that you should gather together all the reserve forces of your being so that you may rise to the dignity and importance of the crisis. Wow.
Yeah, so as vice president of the entire TS, rise to the occasion. Be part of what we're trying to accomplish.
However little you may seem to achieve psychically in this birth, remember that your inner growth proceeds at all times, and that, toward the end of your life and in your next birth, your accumulated merit shall bring you all you aspire to. That's a good little nugget there.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
I think maybe we should reread that.
You should. However little you may seem to achieve psychically in this birth, remember that your inner growth proceeds at all times, and that toward the end of your life and in your next birth, your accumulated merit shall bring you all you aspire to.
And in his next birth. That's quite a prediction, that in your next birth, it shall bring you all you aspire to. This is excellent information. What he's pointing out is that if we live life the way we're supposed to, remember in our conversation about contemplation, how the goal is to live the life 24 hours a day in your everyday life, in your interactions with the outer world. And if you do that, how little you may seem to achieve on the surface, you will actually be making tremendous progress that you probably won't realize at the time, but will understand later.
It also happens during sleep when we're not consciously aware of what's going on. There's development going on.
Yes, there is. You will also find that as you progress in controlling your thoughts, your dreams will change drastically. I don't know what your dreams are at the current time. I've gone through periods where they were very convoluted and lots of activity and lots of people even in close spaces, which is very disconcerting. Currently, right now, they're very calm, no emotional drama whatsoever. So we go through phases in our dreams that correspond with our daily activities. He's going to refer to a Bengali. When he says that, it's kind of important to understand how the Anglo-Indians perceived the inhabitants of Bengal. So I'll have you read that, the last paragraph.
Okay. In the 1880s, the reputation of Bengal among the British in India was complex and increasingly ambivalent, marked by a growing racial disdain for the Bengali elite. As the center of the British Raj, with Calcutta as capital, Bengal was viewed as the most, quote, advanced province, but also as a growing source of political friction. By the 1880s, the British began to view Bengal with suspicion, as it was the hotbed of the emerging Indian independence movement.
So that was just their general attitude toward the Bengalis. And remember, this whole situation with the Zamindars and the riots that we went through for several sessions, that was all centered in Bengal and in Calcutta specifically. So that all comes into play. Any British people had certain preconceived ideas about anyone who came from Bengal and Calcutta.
Continuing with the letter. It is not wise that H.S. Alcott should be exclusively your guest during his stay in Britain. His time should be divided between yourself and others of various opinions, if they should wish to invite him for a short time. He will be accompanied by Mohini, whom I have chosen as my chela, and with whom I sometimes communicate directly. Wow.
Now, he had met Mohini before. I don't know if you remember several letters back. He said he was sending two chelas. One was Mohini, and the other was simply referred to as the little doctor. And we don't know who that was. We don't know what the discussion was that they had, but he had met Mohini before.
Does Mohini ever write anything or create?
Oh, yes. He and Mrs. Holloway wrote the book, Man, Fragments of a Forgotten History. Oh. While he was in London, they tried to write a version of the esoteric doctrine.
Wow.
But they didn't do a great job of it.
Treat the boy kindly, forgetting he is a Bengali, and only remembering that he is now my chela. Do what you can to dignify Alcott's office, for he represents the entire society, and by reason of his official position, stands closest to ourselves in the chain of theosophical work, along with Upasika. Asirvadam.
Asirvadam is a word that means blessing in several different South Indian languages. So he's sending a blessing to him.
KH.
So that was the letter to Sinnett regarding the next letter, which was sent at the same time for the London Lodge, received in the same envelope.
To the London Lodge of the Theosophical Society, greetings. Since the telegrams to Mrs. Kinsgford and Mr. Sinnett and my letter from Mysore have not been fully understood, I was ordered by the Mahatma to advise the postponement of the annual election in order to gain time for the consideration of this letter.
Yeah, he thought that that was going to help things move along, and it actually may have made it worse.
After the cold reception given by the members of the London Lodge on December the 16th to the proposal contained on page 29 of the printed and confidential circular of Mrs. Kinsgford and Mr. Maitland, namely the necessity of forming a distinct body or group within the general group of the London Lodge, their proposition, which is similar to the one I proposed in my letter, written on December 8th at Mysore, combined with the misconceptions, false hopes, and displeasure, the postponement was deemed absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it didn't really solve anything. So the Mahatma said, look, tell them to just postpone that until after Alcott gets there.
As implied in my last letter, the burning question at the time was not the character of Mr. Sinnett's book, but the loyalty or disloyalty of your president and her colleague towards ourselves, whom many of you have seen fit to choose as your esoteric teachers.
So most of them liked what Sinnett was teaching, but on the other hand, some of them preferred Mrs. Kinsgford's approach. He refers to her inaugural address on October 21st, 1883. I think she became president earlier than that, but for whatever reason, she didn't give an inaugural address until October 21st, 1883, which is only a few months prior to the time we're talking about.
In her inaugural address on October 21st, 1883, she stated her intention of dissociating the authority of names, whether in the past or in the present, from abstract principles. Our Lord Tathagata taught similar ideas.
Right. So she said she didn't think it was right to invoke authorities. And what the Lord Buddha said was, don't put emphasis on anything I or any other teacher says, except that if you think it sounds like a good principle, put it into practice, try it out. If it works, good. If not, move on. So that, I believe, is what he's referring to.
The question involved is that of justice. Mrs. Kinsgford's lack of knowledge regarding our real character, our doctrines and status, underlie all her uncomplimentary remarks in connection with me and my colleagues, but they don't enter at all into the matter of her re-election. Her policy quoted, together with her intrinsic worth and her charity to the poor animals, as well as her asking Madame Blavatsky to send her letter to me, made the former course the proper one.
All right, but something has changed here. He quoted one circular, one letter that she had shared previously, but in the meantime, before this letter arrived, before this letter was even written, she and Mr. Maitland wrote a very long circular that they sent to the London Lodge saying all kinds of rude, mean things about the Mahatmas. And remember, I think part of that has to do with the fact that, first of all, she asked HPB to send that previous letter to the Mahatmas, and she was trying, obviously, to influence them. She was hoping that she could get them on her side. Well, in a way, they are. But remember, too, that she had tried at least twice to contact KH psychically, basically saying, hey, KH, if you actually exist, come speak to me. I'm a medium. I'm a psychic. You can do it if you want. And KH told us that he wasn't even aware that she had tried this experiment. But I really think that she was annoyed that that did not happen, and that that's why she became so angry, basically, at the Mahatmas and at the other Theosophists. And so she just unleashed on them.
That's interesting that he wasn't aware of it, because they are aware of anyone who, well, they don't acknowledge everyone. That's interesting that he didn't know.
It depends on their intention, but also remember KH said, obviously she and I travel in different astral circles. He said, our energy is not really compatible.
Interesting. And now the development of events since sending the telegrams will perhaps suggest to some of you the true reasons for such an unusual action as interfering with a branch's election. Time often neutralizes the gravest evils by bringing on a crisis. Also, your president referred to a private letter of mine to Mr. Ward, which she had read. In her inaugural address, she said that she thinks I wrote the letter in evident ignorance of the facts, so we may assume that she believed us to have been likewise ignorant of the forthcoming letter, private and confidential, circulated among the members of the London Lodge on December the 16th.
So she assumes, since they didn't respond to her, that they're unaware of what she's doing. They are very much aware. And when she writes one of these circulars or letters that she gives to all of the people in the London Lodge, they know every word in that, and they discuss it. So he's pointing out, we know a heck of a lot more than she gives us credit for.
This letter has greatly altered the case. On the basis of impartial justice, we find ourselves obligated not to simply reaffirm our decision regarding her reelection, but to add to it certain stipulations and make it henceforth impossible for the president and members to misconceive our position.
So they're still going to campaign for her reelection, but he's going to clarify something about that.
It was our wish then to demonstrate to you that one could be an active member of the society without calling himself our follower or co-religionist, and that is still the case, because the principle has to work both ways. We want it known that we have no right to influence the free will of the members in this or any other matter. Such interference would be in flagrant contradiction to the basic law of esotericism, that personal psychic growth occurs hand in hand with the development of individual effort and the result of acquired personal merit.
So 2 points. First, he wants to point out that they, even though they recommend and are in favor of her being able to teach Hermetic philosophy, don't want anybody to vote based only on that. Vote your conscience. We're just saying that she has a valid point, and if you like it, and if you want to go with that, and that's what you feel like, vote for her. So they're kind of backing up and making it not quite so emphatic that they want her elected. The other thing is that your development, your spiritual development, goes hand in hand with the effort you make, and is the result of acquired personal merit. So that's just an emphasis on how everything we do affects how we grow spiritually. It's not because of information we learn, it's because of application of choosing the right lessons that we put into practice.
Moreover, a great discrepancy is noted in the reports to us of the effects produced by the Kinsgford Sinnett incident upon the members. As a result, I find it impossible to agree to Mrs. Kinsgford's desires as expressed in her letters to Madame Blavatsky. Though Mr. Massey and Mr. Ward give the lady their entire approbation and sympathy, a very large majority of the members seem to give theirs to Mr. Sinnett. So if I were to act on Mr. Massey's suggestion, as reported by Mrs. Kinsgford in her letter of December 20th, where she repeats his opinion that a word only from Mahatma KH would be quite sufficient to reconcile Mr. Sinnett to my view of the matter and to establish between him and the lodge the most perfect cordiality and understanding.
So, are you picking this up? She, quoting Mr. Massey, said, well, Mr. Massey said, if KH would just say, you know what? She is the one that you need to listen to. And Mr. Sinnett just needs to swing his vote over to my direction too. Everything would be fine. I don't know if you're picking up the ego involved here, but she's got an enormous ego.
If I were to do that, I'd be making myself the would-be pope that she deplores, and an unjust one at that. I would be exposing me and Mr. Sinnett to valid criticism even worse than that found in her inaugural address, wherein she affirms her mistrust of all appeals to authority.
And he's going to continue this line of reasoning, but he refers to two spiritual prophets or advisors in America at the time. One you'll know immediately. The other was Thomas Lake Harris, who established a spiritual community, a kind of strange one, in Santa Rosa, California. And he had a bunch of followers who had some rather strange beliefs. But KH obviously doesn't have a high opinion of either one of them. We'll see what he says.
So these were other organizations that already existed back then?
Oh, yeah. In America in the 1800s, there were numerous spiritual organizations. It was a plethora of different organizations and different religions. There was one that was based primarily on the fact that Jesus was going to return any day now. Any day now. They would predict certain days. And when that didn't happen, they'd predict one a little farther out. That was a huge part of this movement at the time.
Are you referring to the one that's still around?
Let's see.
Oh, okay. Among other things she has just said are, I look with sorrow and concern on the growing tendency of the Theosophical Society to introduce into its methods the exaggerated veneration for persons and personal authority, the veritable outcome of which is a mere servile hero worship. There is far too much talk among us about the adepts, our masters and the like, and so on. Anyone who talks like that shouldn't be asking me for similar interference. Jeez. Even though I'm sure my faithful friend, Mr. Sinnett, would not have resented it.
I think he's being a little sarcastic. I think he would have resented it.
Wow. If I had acceded to the lady's desire to appoint her as the apostle of Eastern and Western esotericism, jeez, and try to force her election on even one unwilling member, and taking advantage of Mr. Sinnett's never-wavering regard for myself, influence his future attitude towards herself and the movement, I would then deserve to be taunted as the oracle of the Theosophists, and of the same class as Joe Smith of the Latter-day Saints and Thomas Lake Harris. Oh my gosh. He's mentioning Joseph Smith of the Latter-day Saints.
Yes, in the Mahatma letters.
Jeez. What year was Smith getting his Latter-day Saints together?
Oh, he established his church in 1830.
Oh, way before this.
And he died in 1844.
Oh, okay.
But remember, Sinnett had visited Brigham Young and the Mormons in Salt Lake City around 1868 and was very enthusiastic about their religion. He thought it was really great because everything was organized so well. He thought Brigham Young was a genius. He got fooled.
Sinnett got fooled?
Yeah, imagine that.
Oh my gosh. Huh. Thomas Lake Harris. I can't believe that one who maintained only a few days previously that our wise and truly theosophical course is not to set up new popes and proclaim new lords and masters, should now seek the protection of and request the aid of an authority which could only assert itself on the hypothesis of a blind surrender of private judgment.
And so she wants it both ways. She wants no appeal to authority, but then she wants to appeal to an authority to sway everybody else to her way of thinking. I don't know. I don't understand.
Yeah, people, there's a term for that kind of person. Someone who picks and chooses. She's hypocritical.
She is a hypocrite.
Yeah.
She claims to believe one thing,
Right.
but then she flouts that
Right.
and
When it serves
does
her purpose.
exactly
Right.
the opposite.
Right. As I prefer to attribute Mrs. Kinsgford's desire to her ignorance of the real feeling of some of her colleagues, the nature of which is perhaps now disguised under the polished insincerities of civilized Western life, I would recommend that she and others interested in the present dispute appeal to the decision of the ballot, by which all may express their wishes without exposing themselves to the charge of discourtesy.
And when he talks about her ignorance, it's not meaning stupidity. She's not ignorant, but she's ignoring, she's unaware of a lot of things. And so, you know what? Let's just submit it to the members. Now that everything is clear, let's have the vote, and we'll go along with that.
And now for another consideration. However little we might care for personal slavishness to us, the accepted leaders of the founders of the parent Theosophical Society, we can never approve of disloyalty by any member to the fundamental principles represented by the parent organization.
As we've said before, they don't care if people dislike them, even if they're rude. It doesn't affect them. It doesn't change their ways of thinking. But the one thing they can't do is flout the objects of the society, especially brotherhood. If you can't even get in line with the very concrete and very few objects, then you aren't a theosophist and you don't belong.
Mm-hmm. The rules of the parent body must be lived up to by those who make up its branches, provided that they do not go against the three declared objects of the organization. The experience of the parent society proves that the usefulness of a branch largely depends on the loyalty, discretion, and zeal of its president and secretary. However much their colleagues may do to assist them, the efficient activity of their group develops proportionately with that of its officers.
Yeah, if the officers aren't in line with that, then nothing's going to work out. They're supposed to be the leaders. But if they don't lead in attaining the objects of the society, then we're all at sea here.
In conclusion, I repeat that it is to prevent action in the matter of Mrs. Kinsgford's re-election until all misunderstandings produced by my previous communications have been cleared, that I have advised the annual election of office holders of your lodge be postponed until the arrival of this letter. Moreover, as the president founder, who knows our mind and has our confidence, is expected to be in England in a very short time, we do not see the necessity of taking any hasty steps in the matter. He has been given enough of an overall view of the situation that he will be enabled to deal impartially with this case and others upon his arrival, as the representative of both his master and of the best interests of the society.
Now, we've got an interesting note here. This entire letter so far is not in the handwriting of K.H. It's in the handwriting of one of his chelas. And it was obviously dictated while he was doing his tour of different countries. So he psychically transmitted it to one of his chelas, and HPB told Sinnett that this particular chela was now living primarily in Tibet and often visiting Sikkim, remember the territory that was right near Tibet. So he wrote the letter. We'll find out who it is. And then only the postscript was added by K.H. in his own handwriting and signed by him. So tell us who wrote this letter.
It says, by order of my most venerated guru, Deva Mahatma K, with the triangle symbol, and then it's signed in Devanagari, and then we have transliterated to Bhola Deva Sharma.
Yeah, Bhola Deva Sharma was his chela, and he calls him my most venerated guru, Deva, an honorific title, Deva, Mahatma K, and then instead of KH, he actually drew a triangle, which is a symbol of someone who is an initiate. He probably deserved about 6 of these triangles, but he only put one triangle. And this next part is in KH's own handwriting.
It would be wise to read this letter to the members, including Mrs. Kinsgford, before the new day of election. I would like you to prevent, if possible, any more emotional theatrics. However natural such sensational surprises may be in politics, when parties are composed of partisans who rejoice in party intrigues, they are very painful to witness in an association of persons who devote themselves to the most solemn questions affecting human interest. Let coarser natures wrangle if they want. The wise compound their differences in a mutually forbearing spirit. K.H.
He's going to add one more postscript, but before that, he is basically pointing out how sad it makes him to see that these members of the society in London are treating this like just any other organization that is for fun and entertainment and to waste time on a Sunday afternoon. But he says that's not who we are. We ourselves are concerned with the welfare and the spiritual development of humanity. We take this very seriously. And to see people ignore that and just kind of throw that away in order to stroke their own egos and to fight amongst themselves is sad indeed. So we have certain situations in various theosophical groups. In some, it's just dead. It's just nothing going on because of this lack of any kind of meaningful interaction. But just as bad are the ones who fight about things that are unnecessary. We can both be right. Why do we have to have one person win? We need to not only have discussions, but we have to have meaningful discussions. Get the egos out of the way. That's the only way that we can have a discussion that matches the way they do things in their own brotherhood. Let's try to emulate that brotherhood. So he signed it KH, and then he added one more little thing here.
We would put, PPS, right? Instead of just PS. Mr. Maitland's, quote, remarks and observations on esoteric Buddhism are fully answered by Subba Rao and another still greater scholar.
Which was probably Moria.
They will be sent next week in pamphlet form, and Mr. Sinnett asked to distribute them among those members, especially who may have been affected by the criticism.
Yeah, so this circular that she and Mr. Maitland wrote was, I don't know how many pages. We unfortunately don't have a copy of it in existence, but it was more than 29 pages. And they wrote a reply, Subba Rao and I believe Moria, that was published to respond to this circular. If any of you care to read it, it's in the book Esoteric Writings of T. Subba Rao. There are different versions of this book because it has been reprinted by different organizations in many different ways at many different times. But it takes anywhere from 40 to 50 pages printed in the book, this reply. It's excellent, excellent information. You can go online and there's a different version online available in PDF form. You can read it if you want. Just look for the section that is the reply to Mrs. Kinsgford's circular. That's the end of letter number 122, which was read to the London Lodge members. Again, he refers to psyche or psychic in this next letter, and this is just a short one. We don't know for sure when it was received. You'll see from the subject matter that it's not specific, so no one has been able to pinpoint exactly when it was received. So the compiler of the Mahatma letters put it in where they thought it would be approximately, and this is where it happens to be in the book. Letter number 123, it was received at London, but the date is unknown.
I have just taken your note from where it was placed by her because, although I could read its contents by other means, you would prefer that the paper itself pass into my hand.
And we don't know who he's referring to, who the woman is, whether it was Mrs. Sinnett or it could have been HPB, because later she was in London, but we don't know who the woman is.
Does it seem a small thing to you that the past year has been spent only on your family duties?
And that's in quotes. Sinnett obviously was bemoaning the fact that he was having to spend so much time on family duties. Remember, he had moved back from India after living there for 11 years. He had no furniture unless he had some of it moved later. He had no house to live in. They actually, when they first arrived in London, lived in a house that was owned by his wife's family members. I don't know which one, but her mother lived there at one point. She wasn't living there at the time, so Sinnett and his wife, Patience, moved into that house. So that was where they lived at the time, but he was having to, number one, look for work. He didn't have a job. He didn't have any income. He had saved up, and it turns out he had more money than I realized. The amount of money he came to London with was the equivalent of about $1.6 million in today's money, 2026. $1.6 million. But he still had to find a house. He had to find work.
He really didn't have any kind of income, though. He had the cash.
He was looking for a way to invest it. And so, no, the money was decreasing in value at that point because it wasn't invested anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So let's continue here.
But what better cause for reward, what better discipline than the daily and hourly performance of duty?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Believe me, my pupil, in quotes, the man or woman who is placed by karma in the midst of small plain duties with opportunities for sacrifice and acts of loving kindness, if these are faithfully fulfilled, will rise to the larger measure of duty, sacrifice, and charity to all humanity. What better path towards the enlightenment you're striving for than the daily conquest of self, the perseverance in spite of lack of visible psychic progress, the bearing of ill fortune with that serene fortitude which turns it to spiritual advantage, since good and evil are not to be measured by events on the lower or physical plane. There you go. Interesting.
So, exactly. There's your spiritual practice. It's in front of you every single day. Take everything that we're learning from the Mahatmas, everything that we teach from Raja Yoga and other sources, and if you think it makes sense, put it into practice in your everyday life. Like Paul says, if you're driving, somebody cuts you off, you normally would get angry. Put that into practice. How quickly can I laugh instead of getting angry?
That's it.
That's exactly
what
we're talking about.
Exactly.
Your everyday activities, every interaction should be a blessing to people.
That's beautiful.
May not recognize it as such, but later they're going to say, wow, I had an interaction with some Mormon missionaries one time, and they didn't even try to preach to me. We just talked for an hour or so. And when they left, for whatever reason, I said, 30 years from now, you guys will remember this day. And one of them said, I know I will. So you can influence people on a regular basis with just simple conversations. People don't remember what you say, but they remember how you made them feel. remember that.
That's really beautiful. It's like a blessing.
Yes, exactly.
Whenever you think of someone, you're transmitting energy, which could be considered a blessing.
Right.
Or a curse if it's a bad thought.
And that also is something you have to watch your thoughts all day long. How many times do we repeat negative opinions about somebody or something? And every time you repeat it, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And you, when you start to realize that, think, oh my gosh, what am I doing? You're sending a curse to people you probably love every time you complain mentally about how they do something that you don't like. Stop it. Remind yourself, cut that out, stop it, and send a blessing instead. It takes insight, it takes focus, but you can absolutely do it.
Be not discouraged that your practice falls below your aspirations. Yet be not content with admitting this, since you clearly recognize that your tendency is too often towards mental and moral inaction, rather inclining to drift with the currents of life than to steer a direct course of your own.
And that's the crux of this. We just go along with our regular old bad habits. You have to make an effort to change that. And you can set the goal and the direction. But if you do nothing different, you won't achieve it.
Your spiritual progress is far greater than you know or can realize. Thank you, KH.
Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that. That's encouraging. And you do well to believe that such development is, in itself, more important than its realization by your physical plane consciousness. Boom.
Yeah.
That's a mic drop.
Your higher self recognizes every bit of progress that you make, but you may not be aware of it in your lower self.
I wonder if it's realistic for most people to be the higher self. I don't know if it's even, is it? Because we have two consciousnesses, basically.
Yes.
We do. We're split.
But we can make progress in that direction.
Definitely progress,
Every
of course.
single person can do that.
And we have to act as if, our whole lives, all day, act as if we are the soul instead of this physical plane consciousness only. I will not now enter into other subjects, since this is but a message of sympathetic recognition of your efforts. Nice. And an earnest encouragement to hold a calm and brave spirit toward outer events in the present, and a hopeful spirit for the future on all planes. Wow. Truly yours, KH. Wow. I wonder what prompted him to send this.
I'm sure Sinnett was very discouraged. He was saying, I'm just overwhelmed with all the stuff that I'm trying to do here in my personal life, with my family. I'm back in an environment that is totally different from what it was in India. So I think he was really overwhelmed. Plus, with all the junk that was going on with the London Lodge, he was overwhelmed. All right, another very short letter. This is from KH again. This one was received in London in April 1884. We're getting closer to the time when Alcott will arrive.
My dear friend, amid the various and arduous labors it has pleased the Venerable Chohan to entrust me with, I had entirely forgotten the Kittle incident. You have my explanation. In asking you to keep my secret, I only meant the withholding of certain details that, in their ignorance of the scientific process, your and my opponents would take exception to, make of it a pretext for poking fun at occult sciences, and then charge me with clumsy lies and yourself with credulity, or hero worship, as the golden-haired nymph of the vicarage puts it.
This is funny, but what he was referring to is the fact that he had told Sinnett, give them the basics of the reason for the Kittle incident, the unintentional plagiarism, but don't go into details. Sinnett apparently wrote and said, yeah, but it's causing problems. They're still asking about that. So he's going to tell him, look, I'm going to remove all restrictions. You do whatever you want. But he refers to Mrs. Kinsgford as the golden-haired nymph of the vicarage. Her husband was a vicar, a priest in the Anglican Church.
Huh.
So that was kind of strange. Here she's a very self-sufficient woman, but yet she's married to a vicar.
And she's blonde. I didn't know that.
Yeah, apparently she is blonde. Yeah. And who knows if that's natural or not.
Did they have bleach back then? I guess they did.
I'm assuming they did. They had hairdressers for sure.
That's true. But if you are prepared to stand the fire of furious denial and adverse criticism, make the best use you can of my letter and explanations.
Yeah, if you want to expose yourself. And we pointed out before that they restrict the amount of information they share for very good reasons, because those who are against you will always find something. The more information you give them, the more ammunition they have.
Yeah. The several letters and articles in the last numbers of the Theosophist, given out with my permission, by General Morgan, Subbarao, and Dharani Dhu, may pave the way for you. I would not have the propagation of Theosophy impeded on my account, and to save my name from a few extra blows.
He says, I can take all the blows. If you're willing to share those with me, then share all the information you want.
Yours in haste, K.H.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, guess what? This next segment we could refer to as a rumble in the London Lodge. In April, Alcott had arrived, and he had been working with them for a time. They did have their election, and we'll see what happened with that.
So no letters in between the last one and now it's after the election.
Yes. But we're going to find out that someone else showed up unexpectedly the night of the election, which was, I believe, April 7th. In Joy Mill's book, Reflection on an Ageless Wisdom, she gives 3 different accounts of this, but we're going to read the one from Leadbeater. Remember, Leadbeater had recently joined the society and was traveling on meeting days to stay with Sinnett, and he was doing that this time on April 7th. He was there for the election, and he will describe this in his own words.
Okay. Suddenly and sharply, the door opposite me opened, and a stout lady in black came quickly in and seated herself at the other end of the bench.
And he was sitting on the back row of the hall they were at.
She sat listening to the wrangling for a few minutes, and then began to exhibit distinct signs of impatience. As there seemed to be no improvement in sight, she then jumped up from her seat, shouted in a tone of military command the one word, Mohini.
Mohini!
And then walked straight out of the door into the passage.
So she left the hall and went out into the hallway.
The stately and dignified Mohini came rushing down that long room at the highest speed, and as soon as he reached the passage, threw himself incontinently flat on his face on the floor at the feet of the lady in black.
So, full prostration in front of her.
Many people arose in confusion, not knowing what was happening. But a moment later, Mr. Sinnett himself also came running to the door, went out and exchanged a few words, and then, re-entering the room, he stood up on the end of our bench and spoke in a ringing voice the fateful words, "Let me introduce to the London Lodge as a whole, Madame Blavatsky."
And then let's see what happened after that.
So she shows up. Had many people in the lodge met her before?
No. She, remember, was supposed to be staying somewhere in Europe to regain her health, so they weren't expecting her to be there at all.
Wow. The scene was indescribable. The members wildly delighted and yet half awed at the same time, clustering round our great founder, some kissing her hand, several kneeling before her, and 2 or 3 weeping hysterically. After a few minutes, she was led up to the platform by Colonel Alcott. But why would she leave? Why would she stand up, yell Mohini, and then walk out?
Because she wanted Mohini to come out and talk to her privately before she went back in.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was what took place the night of the election.
Interesting.
So, at the election, here's what happened. They went ahead and Sinnett had decided not to run because he wanted to retire. He had too much going on in his personal life. He didn't want to have to deal with that. So he recommended a barrister, a Mr. Finch, to be the president, to represent the Tibetan Buddhist faction. And as it turned out, only a very few people voted for Mrs. Kinsgford. It sounds like maybe 4 or 5 at the very most, but it wasn't anywhere near half of them. The vast majority voted for Mr. Finch, the one that Sinnett had proposed to be the president. So that was the outcome. They did, after that, decide that Mrs. Kinsgford should, rather than just stay in there, because she was not happy at all, obviously.
Did she demand a recount?
No, I don't know. But they recommended that she form another theosophical group. And that one would study Hermetic philosophy. And then the London Lodge would study the teachings of the Mahatmas. So they did that. Her lodge only lasted a few weeks and then fizzled. So she went on and formed a different organization that wasn't connected with Theosophy at all.
I wonder whatever happened to her and that organization.
Oh, we'll talk about it at the end of our sessions.
Okay.
We're going to follow up on all of these major players.
Wow.
All right, so go ahead.
Okay, letter number 125.
Now, this is interesting because this is not from KH. It's from his partner in crime, Moria. And this was received just a week later, April 15th. And I don't know by what means, but he refers to the election, so it wasn't sent by mail from India.
A week later, meaning a week after the election, approximately. It starts off, Sinnett Sahib is... my respectful salams.
Like he forgot to put that at the beginning.
Informed that his, quote, guardian is so occupied with official business that he cannot give even a moment's consideration to the London Lodge or its members, nor to write him personally, whether by pen or by precipitation, the more difficult, not to mention more costly of the 2 methods, to our reputations in the West anyhow.
This is quite interesting. He can't write to you either by pen or by precipitation, but I can. And he says precipitation is more difficult, not just because of the process, but to our reputation in the West. So he's being facetious, obviously.
Mohini cannot stay in London indefinitely, nor for any greater length of time, as he has duties to perform elsewhere, duties to his family as well as others to the Theosophical Society.
Now, Mohini had been there, I think, for a few weeks at this point. And Sinnett really loved that because he was well versed in Buddhist philosophy and I believe also Advaita philosophy. And so his teachings were really good.
Besides being a chela, and thus not a free man in the ordinary understanding of the term, he has numerous mouths to feed at Calcutta. Plus, he must earn enough to repay the friend who advanced him the expenses of his present mission. Besides whatever KH may or may not do for him, something he can't count on, the same as any other chela.
He had been advanced 125 pounds. by someone in India. Now, Mohini was from Calcutta, a Bengali, and he was well known as an attorney, but he was married, he had children, and apparently other family members, maybe, that he had to support, 10 mouths to feed. So not only did he have to pay his own expenses to go to London and to stay there for whatever length of time, but he had other expenses at home as well. So 125 pounds at that time would be the equivalent of about $27,000 today. And that was just the amount that he had borrowed from somebody to help pay his expenses.
At the same time, let it be known to you that he needs a temporary change of climate. He suffered greatly from cold in that high room where there is no fireplace in your house, and KH had to surround him with a double shell against a deadly cold that threatened him. Remember that Hindus are exotic plants in your inclement fog and cold, and those who need them have to take care of them. I didn't ask Alcott to tell you this last Sunday because I didn't want you, who are already prejudiced against him, to think it was his own idea.
Now, this is kind of sad. Moria could have given Alcott the message, tell Sinnett to put him in a different room. You've got other rooms available. He is suffering from the cold. Why Mrs. Sinnett didn't recognize that, I don't know. She was supposedly kinder than Mr. Sinnett.
Why wouldn't a nice townhouse have a heater up there or something?
Well, it's a nice townhouse now, but at the time it was, I'm sure, nowhere near as nice, and heating any house was very expensive. So they only heated certain rooms, and this room didn't even have a fireplace.
I don't like the cold either.
But the sad part is that Moria didn't feel like he could tell Alcott to say that to Sinnett because Sinnett already disliked him, and he would think that he was just going out of his way to complain and would think even less of him.
If you need Mohini's help at London, the Theosophists at Paris require it even more, since their occult education is inferior to yours. Wow.
Yeah, they spoke a different language. They didn't have anything at all similar to the teachings that Sinnett had.
It was strange that there was no plan for the lodges to do anything.
Yeah, there was so much work to be done that a curriculum, they were trying to work on it, but there was no one who had the time to devote all of their time to it.
It is planned that he should divide his time equally among all the European centers of spiritual activity, and if he is needed at Paris on the 11th, he will also be allowed to come back to London when the continental movement is well underway. In any event, you will have Alcott the better part of the time, but fear not. If Henry is allowed to prolong his stay in London, he will not concern either of you by coming down in his extravagant Asiatic undress, for he will not stay with you, but with the Arundel ladies, as ordered before now, the order being reiterated by me when Madam Sahib remarked it was better he should stay where he was after Upasika had left.
Yeah. Alcott was staying with them previously, but he had a habit of dressing in Indian clothes. So a dhoti, the lower cloth, the lower garment, and an upper one, more like a shirt or, an overshirt. They did not like that. They thought that was pretentious and weird. And I think most people in London would think the same thing. But that's what he did. The Mahatmas didn't care. But the Sinnetts apparently did, including Mrs. Sinnett. When he says, Madam Sahib remarked that it would be better if he stayed with the Arundels. She's like, yeah, we don't want him here. Yeah, that was their attitude.
Nor is Alcott worse than many others, and though some persons may not concede it, there are worse wranglers than he.
Wrangler being someone who can take on a difficult task and sort it out where people's opinions are involved.
I must not close without letting you know that in the Kinsgford row, justice is no longer on your side.
Oh.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Although you are unwilling to admit it, you show spite, Sahib, personal spite. Oh, gosh. You have defeated her, and you now want to punish her more. This is not right.
Yeah, so she lost. His party won by a huge majority. And yet he's doing something that is antagonizing her. And the Mahatmas aren't in favor of that. In fact, KH will tell him later, you are a sore winner. We usually talk about a sore loser, but he was a sore winner.
You ought to learn to dissociate your consciousness from your external self more than you do if you don't want to lose KH. Whoa. For he is much annoyed at what goes on. Excuse my remarks, but it is for your own benefit. So, begging pardon. Moria. Oh.
Yeah, once again, he got scolded, and rightfully so. Alcott got scolded numerous times, as we know, because of his attitude towards HPB. Sinnett gets scolded because of his attitude toward both of them, and especially Alcott. They really didn't like Alcott. But they're learning. They're learning, and as we pointed out before, the Mahatmas never take offense personally. They will love people that even denigrate and throw mud at them, like Hume and C.C. Massey and others. Never stopped loving them. So there we have the rumble at the London Lodge and the aftermath. Thank you for following along in our exciting adventure here, and we'll see you in session number 81.